Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Angela Greiling Keene. I'm a reporter for Bloomberg News and I am the 106th president of the National Press Club. We are Thank you. We are the world's leading professional organization for journalists, committed to our profession's future through our programming with events such as this, and we foster a free press worldwide. For more information about the National Press Club, please visit our website at www.press.org. To donate to programs offered through the National Press Club Journalism Institute, please visit www.press.org/institute. On behalf of our members worldwide, I'd like to welcome our speaker today and those of you attending today's event. Our head table includes guests of our speaker as well as working journalists who are club members. And if you hear applause in our audience, we'd note that members of the general public are attending as well, so it's not necessarily evidence of a lack of journalistic objectivity. I'd also like to welcome our C-SPAN and public radio audiences. Our luncheons are featured on our member-produced weekly podcast from the National Press Club, available on iTunes. You can follow the action today on Twitter using the hashtag NPCLunch. After our guest speech concludes, we'll have question and answer time, and I will ask as many questions as time permits. Now it's time to introduce our head table guests. I'd ask each of you to stand briefly as your name is announced. From your right, Mark Sheff, who is a reporter for Crane Communications and a proud alum of Purdue University, just like our speaker today. Kathy Bonk, who is the executive director of the Communications Consortium. Tejinder Singh, editor of India America Today. Barbara Cochran, the Curtis B. Hurley Chair in Public Affairs Journalism at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. Susan Heavey, a reporter with Reuters News and chair of the Press Club's membership committee. Bridget Duru, a Girl Up teen advisor. Skipping over the podium, Allison Fitzgerald, a freelance journalist and the Speakers Committee chair. We'll skip over our speaker for just a moment to Andrea Stone, a freelance journalist and the Speakers Committee member who organized today's event. Thank you for that, Andrea. Alika Basu, a senior fellow who is working with the United Nations Foundation on women's reproductive rights while also writing a book about that issue in India. Molly McCluskey is a freelance writer and the vice chair of the Press Club's Freelance Committee. Charity Tews with UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, where she is Director of Celebrity Relations and Special Projects. And Anna Rold, the Editor-in-Chief of the Diplomatic Courier. Our guest today is on a mission to delay the age of marriage in Ethiopia, reduce smoke from cook stoves, and get the people of Haiti back on track following a devastating 2010 earthquake. Kathy Calvin is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Nations Foundation, whose mission is to link the work of the UN with others around the world. Ms. Calvin worked in government and private industry before she joined the nonprofit world. Not long after taking over the UN's public charity, she was quoted saying, "I was in politics before politics got nasty, in journalism before it was taken apart by the internet, and now philanthropy at a time when so much innovation and risk-taking are happening." Ms. Calvin's organization was started in 1998 with a $1 billion grant from media mogul Ted Turner. With an annual budget of $110 million, it is the largest funder of UN programs and services. And its CEO has gotten noticed. Ms. Calvin has been listed in Fast Company's League of Extraordinary Women and was named one of Newsweek's 150 Women Who Rock the World. Born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, Ms. Calvin graduated from Purdue University with a degree in speech therapy, but she took a different path when she moved to Washington a year later. As she recently told the Washington Post, when Senator Gary Hart of Colorado asked her to be his press secretary when she was only 26, she was, quote, "scared to death that someone would find out I didn't know anything." Despite her fears, Ms. Calvin leaned in. When Hart ran for the White House in 1984, she became one of the first women press secretaries on a major presidential campaign. After politics, she joined U.S. News and World Report. As the magazine's director of editorial administration, she was part of the team that led it onto the internet as one of the first news organizations to go digital. That got the attention of AOL's Steve Case. In 1997, he hired Ms. Kelvin to be Chief Communications Officer for what was then known as America Online. After the company merged with Time Warner, she was named president of the internationally focused AOL Time Warner Foundation. In 2003, Ms. Kelvin joined the United Nations Foundation as Chief Operating Officer. She moved into her CEO position in 2009 and added the title of president just this year. Since then, the mother of two has sharpened the UN Foundation's mission toward empowering women and girls, decreasing child mortality, and fostering clean energy to combat climate change for future generations. It's not necessarily work with immediate rewards. In Haiti, the foundation lauds the 80% of earthquake-related debris that's been removed, and the fact that nearly 3 million children have been vaccinated against polio, and 40% of the 470,000 temporary jobs that have been created have gone to women. But more than 300,000 people in that island nation still don't have places to live outside of tent cities with illnesses, poverty, and filth. In her personal philanthropy, Ms. Kelvin has combined her interests in journalism, women, and international affairs. Among the many boards on which she has served are the Newseum, Internews, and the International Women's Media Foundation. Not that she sits still for very long. When not jetting around the globe for her job, Ms. Kelvin says she's most likely to be found on the back of her husband's motorcycle, tooling around the back roads of America. Please help me give a warm National Press Club welcome to Kathy Kelvin.
Thank you, Angela. That was a great introduction. I think Andrea may have had a hand in it as well. It's so great to see everyone here today. I thank a lot of friends who I haven't seen in years for coming, and I'm so proud to have our teen advisor, Bridget, with us today, and Alaka Basu is representing the UN Foundation up here as well. It's important and significant that the National Press Club is honoring National History Month this time, and I'm glad that I'm part of the celebration and have the chance to talk to you all about why we have to start with women and girls. I've been on this podium many times, but always just sitting at either side of the table with all those various bosses you heard about. So you are absolutely right. I have been leaning in for my whole life. Take note, Cheryl, and I think it's time we all talked about that. So thank you all for coming, also for being here for this important celebration and discussion about the contributions of women to our society. I wanted to come today to talk about the piece that's often overlooked when we talk about women, and that is the contribution and the opportunity to invest in adolescent girls. It's an incredible piece of the story that, frankly, has been overlooked for years and is now suddenly becoming the thing that everyone is acknowledging is maybe the answer to alleviating poverty. So I want to focus on girls today, the global revolution to empower them, and why it's so important for each of us in this room to join in. So this topic is actually very near and dear to my heart, but also to the UN Foundation, and I would say it's in our DNA from everything we do, from trying to ensure that women and girls can cook cleanly and safely in their own homes, that girls can stay in school, that we empower girls with cell phones, and that all programs take into account where girls exist. And I have to say thanks first to Ted Turner, our founder and chairman, because this is actually Ted's issue as well. He really believes that women and girls have to be at the top of the global agenda. He's even said it's time for women to take over completely. Men have had their turn and they kind of messed it up, and he's ready for us to take over. But he and our board have made the issues of women and girl a cornerstone of our work from day one, 15 years ago when he first created the foundation. And it's important also that women and girls are at the top of the agenda for our Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon. He has made his own initiative called Every Woman, Every Child, which takes account of the importance of ensuring that we reduce women's and children's mortality, to make his signature initiative. And so we work closely with him on that issue. I also have to note that the Secretary General is extraordinary for the number of senior women he's put into office at the UN. It makes us all really proud that we're working with him. And then you heard a little bit about my career. I've never had the word women in my title, but I've always been a big believer in ensuring that women are careful and helpful to each other, and also that women are able to work in workplaces that are open to their needs to have a full and balanced life, and whether that's a family life or a charitable life or a volunteer life. I've always thought that was an important role that women brought to a workforce, and that a workforce should respect that. So while it's never been part of my title, women and girls have always been part of my focus and part of my passion. And I've realized along the way that as I've delved into this issue, the lesson is clear. It always starts with a girl, and especially change starts with a girl. So girl power, to me, is one of global development's most potent weapons in the fight against poverty. A healthy, educated, empowered adolescent girl has the unique potential to break the cycle of poverty for herself, for her family, her community, and her country. We call this the girl effect. And it's not rhetoric, it's fact. There's a growing body of data and studies that have shown that supporting girls and women, promoting their education, their health and safety, their right to plan their families, and more, correlates with healthier families, higher family income, economic development, and environmental sustainability. Let me just cite a couple statistics. A year of primary school boosts girls' eventual wages by an estimated 10 to 20%, and an extra year of secondary school can increase it by 15 to 25%. Meeting the unmet need of the 222 million women and adolescent girls who want but don't have access to reproductive services and modern contraception would prevent more than 80,000 maternal deaths and 1 million infant deaths every year. And a World Bank paper found that closing the gender gap so girls are economically as viable as boys would increase India's annual GDP growth by 4.4% and Nigeria's by 3.5%. All of this promotes more productive and stable countries, more markets for our companies, and it enhances global prosperity and security, which benefits us all. But here's the challenge before us. While girls have the potential to change the world, they don't often have the chance. The problem is that in many parts of the world, we're not only ignoring their potential, we're actively burying it under bricks of discrimination, exclusion, and injustice. Right now, millions of adolescent girls endure quiet crises that rarely make the news or see the inside of a courtroom. Girls between 10 and 14 are particularly vulnerable. They're often forced to marry young, drop out of school, and carry the burden of household chores. Deprived of education, skills, and opportunities, they don't get to earn a living. They're often physically and sexually abused, and they're often denied the right and tools to plan their own families. An adolescent girl doesn't always get to decide if and when she becomes pregnant, but a girl under 15 is 5 times more likely to die from complications of pregnancy than a woman in her 20s. And complications from pregnancy and childbirth are the leading cause of death for girls aged 15 to 19 in developing countries. These are shocking statistics. So these girls aren't valued on a local level as equal members of their families or communities. And for a long time, they were actually ignored on the global agenda scene as well. 10 years ago, when I joined the UN Foundation, girls weren't really counted or addressed significantly, even by the UN. One report looked at development assistance from 2005 to 2006 and found that less than 2 cents of every development dollar was targeted toward gender equality for girls. This meant that girls were missing out on opportunities to get ahead, and the global community was missing out on a key tool to fight poverty. So once condemned to the shadows of these injustices are starting to get the attention they deserve. A growing movement, including the UN Foundation, I'm proud to say, the Nike Foundation, UN agencies, and others have brought the girl effect into the public eye and demanded a place for girls on the international agenda. and girls themselves have started demanding a seat at the table. The result is the start of a global revolution to recognize the rights of girls and to realize their potential. This revolution is evident every time a girl like Malala, the Pakistani teenage activist who was shot by the Taliban, goes to school despite threats of violence and intimidation. It's evident every time a man or a woman or a boy or a girl takes to the streets to protest violence against girls and women, as we witnessed after the brutal gang rapes in India and South Africa. And it's evident every time someone plays a Facebook game or watches a documentary about girls' education, thanks to Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wu-Dunn. And it's evident every time a girl starts a business, joins a community club, or challenges a law in her own community or a tradition that says she and her sisters don't have equal rights or equal opportunities. 2 years ago, I had the chance to experience the girl revolution in a profound and personal way. I accompanied Michelle Bachelet, the very inspiring head of UN Women, to Liberia to be with another inspiring woman, the head of that country, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, as we celebrated the 100th anniversary of International Women's Day. And I met with a group of girls in a village called Carysburg, and with me I was carrying letters from girls in our country, written to them to say that they thought about them, cared about them, wanted to share their hopes and dreams. These letters were written by members of the Girl Up campaign that the UN Foundation had created just a year before. And as I was sitting there with these wonderful girls in a hot Liberian community center, reading a letter from a girl in Cincinnati to a girl in Carysburg, it was clear that there were definitely differences between the girls who were writing the letters and those who were receiving them. The realities of their lives, their homes, their schools, their opportunities were in stark contrast. But what really struck me, and I think you've all seen this and know it, was that their hopes and dreams were identical, and the common connection between them about being a girl. These girls are change agents wherever they are in the world. They're filled with creative ideas, compassion, courage, and promise. They dare to dream big, they're hungry to make a difference, and they care about what happens to each other. That's why we created the UN Foundation's Girl Up campaign to help girls here, help girls everywhere. And what we've witnessed has been amazing. Girls across this country have mobilized in unprecedented ways, texting, tweeting, even lobbying their members of Congress. And as you know, girls today are pretty socially engaged. They're globally aware and active in philanthropy. We call them philanthro-teens because we've seen what they can do. They don't always give money. Sometimes they have access to it. Sometimes they have access to the parent's credit card. But they are great fundraisers. And so what we've seen them do is everything from Zumba classes to bake sales to you name it, birthday parties. They want to do something to support their sisters around the world. And if you're a parent today, you know these girls are a force to be reckoned with. The good news is that as the revolution has grown, so have the results. Adolescent girls and the international community have made important advances together in this area. The UN's Millennium Development Goals, established in 2000, provided a number of concrete goals to mobilize around, and we have made real progress in the last 15 years. I think sometimes we forget to celebrate progress. We are often focused on the negative, and I heard Bono recently talk about being a factivist and reminding people that if we don't look at the progress we've made, we can't get future people to join us in making progress in the future. So I want to cite a few things. We now have virtual parity between boys and girls in primary education. Child and maternal deaths are no longer commonplace or acceptable in many countries where new practices are in place and being implemented. From 1990 to 2011, the number of children who died before their 5th birthday dropped 41%. Maternal deaths dropped 47% in about the same time period. And policies are making a difference. I'm a big believer in policy change. I'm a big believer in advocacy. And we're really seeing that when people come together and demand changes beyond what we're doing in terms of relief or on-the-ground help, it makes a lasting difference. So in December, the UN General Assembly unanimously approved a resolution ending female genital mutilation. It's shocking it took till December, but it has happened. And last week, I'm really happy to report that the Commission on the Status of Women, a two-week session at the United Nations, ended its annual session by adopting strongly agreed conclusions to preventing and ending violence against women and girls. And of course, we have to acknowledge the tremendous and awesome leadership by this administration. Earlier this month, President Obama signed into law the Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, which includes new provisions to make child marriage in developing countries an official foreign policy priority of the U.S. government. This administration has been incredible, and they've made strong and robust commitments to women and girls through their Global Health Initiative, through their stands on violence, by putting women and women's issues at the top of most agendas, by creating gender policies. And it was encouraging that just last week, President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry have named Kathy Russell to serve as the next ambassador at large for global women's issues, replacing Milan Verveer. So I want to say one more thing about the progress we've made. It hasn't happened by accident. It's evidence that the international community can achieve progress when we come together with purpose and determination. So what still needs to be done? What else should we do to ensure that the girl revolution is continuing, and what else can we do to put girls at the top of the global agenda? Well, first, we need better data about girls and whether and how development programs reach them. Girls count, so let's make sure girls are counted. Second, we need to take programs that work to scale and increase investments in girls. This should be a no-brainer. The benefits to them and to us are unmistakable. Third, we have to overturn laws and policies that discriminate against girls and pass ones that protect their rights. Once good laws are in place, we have to make sure that they're enforced. Next, we need to expand education and economic opportunities for adolescent girls, and we need to increase their access to jobs, training, and financial assets. And finally, an important part of opening up the economic opportunities for girls is closing the technology gender gap. We know the power of this transformative technology. We need to put it in the hands of girls so they can use it to develop their own futures. And I just want to say how important I think it is that we take one final step in ending child marriage and expanding voluntary family planning access for women and girls, and particularly girls. 90% of the first births for girls under 18 happen within a marriage. They're already married. And as Maria Idle of the Nike Foundation said last year, this isn't an issue of promiscuity. We have allowed girls access to family planning to be a political, religious, and cultural issue. But the fact of the matter is, if she's married, she needs access to family planning. Young married girls shouldn't be deprived of these essential services when they are most vulnerable. And the undeniable fact is, all adolescent girls have the right to quality reproductive health information and services. This shouldn't be treated as a controversial issue or a wedge issue. It should be treated as a human rights issue. So the world's at a crossroads, and what we do or fail to do now has enormous consequences. The international community can stick with the status quo, which deprives millions of girls of their rights, or we can vastly ramp up our efforts to get adolescent girls the services, education, and economic opportunities they need and deserve. Right now, discussions are underway about what comes after the current Millennium Development Goals in 2015. We must seize this opportunity to explicitly prioritize girls in the post-2015 framework. So what I've tried to lay out here today is quite a manifesto, or maybe it's a girlifesto, but it boils down to something quite simple. If we want to drive progress in the world, we need to put the girls in the driver's seat. We know how to make that happen, but we need the collective will to do it. And we need you to join the girl revolution, to raise your voices, to let leaders and girls know you care about their rights. And after years of doing this work, I don't take anything for granted. We can't assume people know about girls. We can't assume they know about how they can be poverty-changing eradicators. So all of you have to join us. So join Girl Up. or another organization. Learn more about the Girl Effect and look into the Coalition for Adolescent Girls. Support the UN, use your social networks, and make girls a priority by going to myworld2015.org. It's a website the UN has created to hear from everyone about what the priorities should be going forward. So whether you're a man or a woman, a development expert, a CEO, a student, a concerned citizen, or even a reporter, you can do something to make girls' causes your cause. And together with girls around the world, we can do something big. You know the famous quote by Robert Kennedy about ripples of hope that each one of us can make. I want to remind you that adolescent girls are standing up all over the world and sending out ripples of hope. If we stand with them together, we can create a sea change for girls and our lives. Thank you very much.
You said the status quo deprives women and girls. On what do you place the blame for that being the case?
It's a good question. I think it's a combination of tradition, culture, and politics. Frankly, nobody likes to change the power structure, and so if girls are out, they're going to stay out until somebody's willing to move aside and let them join. So I think we need to address this from three ways. We need rules to change, and so countries that have put women quotas and affirmative goals about putting women into legislatures are making a difference. I don't love numbers necessarily, but you can see a difference when a country like Rwanda says that there will be a certain number of women in the legislature. Rules change, laws change, et cetera. Second, we need to talk to fathers and men. What we found in a lot of countries is that until there's a recognition of the economic potential of a girl, she's not valued in her own community. So sometimes it's as simple as providing a goat or a sheep to a family that keeps their daughter in school for 2 more years, that changes the dynamic and the understanding of the potential that the girl has to offer.
In the U.S., as you alluded to, there's been a lot of talk in the last few months about having it all. But as you told us in your speech, in many nations, women are not even free to go to school, work, or marry. Do you want the conversation eventually in those other countries to be about whether they can have it all like we're talking about here in the U.S.?
We're not even comfortable with it here yet. That said, I don't think it's that off topic all over the world. I think people all over the world struggle with questions of how to make sure they are caring for their family, as well as making sure they are able to earn a living, as well as caring about what's happening to their planet. I mean, we think that these are conversations we're having here in the U.S. because we can afford to, but I think all over the world people are aware that they have a combination of values and a combination of goals in their lives. What I would hope happens as women and girls' lives improve around the world is that they are doing so in partnership with the men in their lives. I think that we've too often left this to be a women's issue, and I think increasingly we know that just as we found in this country, having the ability to care about your family is not just a women's issue, it's a man's issue as well. We want to ensure that our workforces are equally compassionate to lots of different needs that families have, whether it's taking care of elderly people or not. These are open-ended issues for us, and I think as we see women from around the world, and if you talk to Alaka Basu from India, you learn that women are beginning to stand up and speak out on the things that matter to them most, and sometimes it's having it all, and sometimes it's ensuring that they get what they deserve.
You said that family planning and contraception access for adolescents is a global human rights issue, but in the U.S., HHS recently blocked the FDA's decision that adolescents should have broader access to emergency contraception right here. What are your thoughts on that issue right here in Washington?
Thanks. It's very important, I think, that we first start with the principle that there is access to voluntary reproductive health services and supplies, and we've always stood for that in this country and globally. And if you look at the ICPD that was passed 20 years ago by the UN that ensured that women all over the world would have access to abortion where legal, to reproductive health services and family planning, those are important things. It's been a tough issue when you talk about adolescence because people are uncomfortable talking about adolescence and sex. But I think increasingly what we need to do is make sure that there's access and that there's family conversations that take place around this. So I think it's time that in this country, certainly what we've seen with Planned Parenthood speaking out for what the polling numbers show is incredible support for contraception is supported.
We've seen a spate of violence against women, from gang rape in India to the arrest of journalists in Somalia for interviewing a victim, and even here in the U.S. with women unable to get restraining orders and guns, as reported by the New York Times just this week. What steps need to be taken to better secure the safety of women and girls?
Well, I think it's a number of things. The police have to make this a high priority, and we need to make sure that in instances like in Steubenville, the victim is the #1 priority and not anyone else. I mean, I'm horrified by what's gone on there. So I think, one, it comes to the police. Second, outrage is underrated, and we need to be outraged. And I think we've sort of sometimes, there's a fatigue effect on outrage, and it's time to bring some outrage back. It's simply unacceptable. And then third, I think, and one of my colleagues pointed this out the other day, that the Steubenville incident has really reminded us, we've sort of lost the way to talk about sex and violence with our children, and being able to explain to our sons what is right and wrong, and explain to our girls about their rights to stand up and speak for themselves and to feel totally comfortable in their rights is really important. So I think to some degree it starts with the police, but it also comes back to our culture.
This questioner says, charity begins at home. Are you satisfied with the condition of girls and women here in the U.S.?
I'm a big supporter of the Washington Area Women's Foundation, which does phenomenal work on behalf of women and girls in our region. And no, I mean, we have so much more to do. I mean, the number of women living in poverty, 1 in 5 children in this country going to bed hungry at night. There are some horrible statistics in this country right now for women and girls and children. I also think we've slid, and Sheryl Sandberg points this out in her book, in terms of gender equity and gender parity in this country. We haven't seen any progress, for instance, in the number of women in corporate boardrooms in 10 years. So there's a lot that this country needs to work on, and I think it's just as important to think global and act local in this area as it is in any other. One reason that I was so excited when we founded the Girl Up campaign is not only that we were helping bring new support and new advocates to the case of girls around the world, but we discovered that we were also creating girl leaders in this country. And it's been amazing to me to watch Bridget and some of her other colleagues in the Girl Up campaign take hold of this issue, bring to it their own fresh sense and perspective, and unfair is the #1 word they all use when they describe what happens to girls around the world, and then their determination to do something about it. If we can empower this generation to speak up and not take things for granted, I think we can make a big difference.
This questioner says, accurately, I note only 2 men on the dais here. And the questioner asks, how do we involve men and boys in what you're talking about today?
Great. Well, there should be more men up here, so we can fix that. Actually, I have to say, I have found there are so many men who are genuine advocates and believers in the power of girls and women. I mean, starting from Ted Turner, our boss, but through a lot of other great leaders. We can't do this without men and boys being active participants for so many reasons you can't even count, but starting with recognizing that the power shift that has to take place has to start with men. Second, that men, and I find this true with many men who have daughters, have to believe that women have every right and opportunity to get ahead and dream their dreams. But third, in most cultures, the conversation that goes on between men and women is really critical. And when we can educate the men to recognize the value of their daughters, to appreciate the value of their wives being bread earners, winners, to make room for women in the decision-making process, we see fundamental change. Muhammad Yunus, taught us that when you give women the opportunity to make a little money, bring it back to their family, they actually spend it on their family. We also learned that too often men aren't bringing it back to their family. So we know there are some dynamics that are going to be increasingly difficult to deal with. But as we strengthen the role of women globally as well as locally, I think we're going to see more men coming to the cause because the benefits are for everyone, not just the women.
With discussion of the new pope, this questioner says there's been little talk about female inclusion in the Catholic Church. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not a Catholic, but first of all, I've been very impressed by the populist nature of this pope. I think it's exciting to see this breath of fresh air that he's bringing. He's got some big challenges ahead of him, and obviously people have focused a lot on the scandals that have beset the church, as well as some of the questions about the church's views on reproductive services and contraception. But clearly the issue of women, which we've seen change in so many other religious institutions, has got to be one that's on their agenda. It's not clear to me this pope is prepared to take that issue on, but if he gets a couple of the others, I think it will pave the way for a more inclusive church. And I certainly know Catholic women are really strong activists, and we value their speaking out whenever they do on the issue of reproductive health.
How do you deal with arguments that the treatment of girls and women in some countries is defined by culture or religion? Is that a legitimate defense?
I think it's a legitimate answer because it's true. It's not necessarily a legitimate excuse or defense. It's hard to change culture and tradition, and who changes it is really important. If you look at the experience of the organization TOSTAN that went after the issue of female genital mutilation in a number of African countries, they didn't go in and try to change that practice from the basis of Western values. They went in and tried to understand the tradition and the history and understand even the sense of the cultural version of beauty that was behind all of it. Great progress has been made, but only by having conversations that dealt with everything from healthcare to what if our girls are cut and the girls in the next village aren't, and therefore they're looked differently. They had to deal with all of those issues. So it's not that it's right or wrong, it's that they've existed for years and years and years, and often are passed down by grandmothers or mothers-in-law as much as it is the men. So I think we have to grapple with those issues and not necessarily say they're irrelevant because they're based on tradition or practice, but come to the understanding of how they've changed. One of the best examples Nick, Christoph and Cheryl Boudin use in their book, Half the Sky, is how the practice of binding women's feet in China changed over just one generation. And it just took one leader to say, it's really not the way it should be any longer, and everyone changed. But up until then, everybody believed in it. It was a beauty recognition, and it was a tradition that seemed impossible to change.
This question, which I think comes from a young person in our audience, says, how can young girls be involved in discussion of human trafficking? So many parents want to shelter them, but they need to know as they are targeted. How to bring this up in the U.S. and abroad?
Wow, what a great question. Well, first of all, trafficking is a huge issue, and it's not just in the places that we think of around the world. There's trafficking in this country, and we've got to stop the demand as much as we need to deal with the supply. It's such a crucial issue. I love the fact that young women are thinking about it. They should think about it for many reasons. They should be speaking out about it as an economic issue that needs to be dealt with. They need to understand the risks to themselves wherever they live, and so it's awesome if a young girl can bring that up with her parents. If it's a topic that's so difficult to discuss with our families and with each other, you can only imagine why governments just don't want to deal with it or are afraid to go deeper into it. So I think it would be awesome if young girls actually became some of the strongest advocates for this. I have to give Vital Voices credit. I think they've done a fabulous job of making this a serious issue, and I think our government also has been very forward-looking on this. So hopefully if there's a young girl in the audience who is thinking about that, we can all give her some support and thank her for thinking about this issue.
We have a lot of questions about Hillary Clinton. Our audience wants to know in various ways your assessment of Secretary Clinton's focus on women and girls and the changes she made, and then also whether you think that Secretary Kerry will keep that priority on women and girls.
I'm going to say yes. I think Senator Kerry is going to keep that tradition because he's no fool, and it was a very successful one for Hillary Clinton, and I think he's a smart guy, and he'll recognize that keeping the pressure on and making women and girls a focus is really a high priority. I think Kathy Russell's going to be a great addition. You know, she has a track record with him and a track record with Vice President Biden and Jill Biden, where she was a staff director. So the most critical piece of Milan and Hillary's relationship was that they had a relationship. So I'm hoping this one will be just as strong. I think Hillary did just an incredible job of demonstrating what a strong woman looks like, of putting women and girls into each of the program areas that she thought the State Department needed to lead on. So it wasn't an add-on, it was an integration, and that's the way it should be, of encouraging USAID to have its own gender parity policy, and I think USAID has been brilliant at its leadership. And in speaking out as much for a woman's right to have her own voice, as she did about a woman's right to her own body and to any of the other issues. I mean, I think her vision of women as active citizens and leaders and empowered individuals really will be one of the hallmarks of her tenure. Whether she runs for office, whether she continues to exercise her great voice and power from a philanthropic position, which is not a bad place to be, I think we will benefit even more from her and her ability to speak out on these issues, and I hope we'll all encourage her to do that.
You praised the Obama administration for supporting the effort to elevate women's issues, that we were just talking about now. Questioner asked, what about Congress? International development and foreign policy in general are often ignored. Are there legislative leaders that you see in this area, and what would you like to see more out of Congress?
More women in Congress would be a good start. But actually, you know, we have a record number of women senators right now. I think we're at 20, which is a good sign, and we have some great women leaders in Congress. We actually have a lot of congressional leaders who are believers in family planning, and, you know, we need more, but I think most members of Congress would not be surprised to learn that their constituents and they aren't always on the same page on this issue. Our polling shows that, you know, there's great support for family planning and contraceptive services across the country, even in districts where members don't necessarily support it. We actually find the same thing is true for support for the UN. The numbers are really high, even though if you just listen to members of Congress talk, you might sense that the UN is still the place where black helicopters exist and all of that. But there is great support within the country for the role the UN plays in supporting peace and prosperity, in bringing relief to citizens who need it around the world, and most importantly for serving U.S. strategic interests, whether it's through peacekeeping or other. So we do have some great friends in Congress. There's a number of caucuses now that are Global Health Caucus, and there's the Malaria Caucus and others. So we're starting to see members of Congress take on some of these foreign policy issues. They're hearing about these from their constituents. We were really proud that Senator Dick Durbin was the author with Olympia Snowe of the landmark legislation to end child marriage that just was enacted into law. So we are very excited that there's some opportunities with this Congress. You know, the sequestration and the cuts in the budget, I think, are going to be a challenge across the board. But I think as each new session of Congress comes in, we find that there are some new members there who are more globally aware and are certainly hearing from their citizens, ranging from the faith-based community to young people to businesses who are clearly thinking ahead toward where their markets are going to be.
Given that we're here at the National Press Club and that you spent a good part of your career in the media, let's look inward for a moment. The Women's Media Center recently put out a report finding that women are still underrepresented both as news sources and as top journalists in management positions. Should we be concerned about this on either side of the equation? And if so, what suggestions do you have for improvement?
I hadn't seen the study, but I'm not surprised by it. I mean, it still shocks me when I read a story and there aren't women's sources, when I see a new TV show and the diversity is still lacking and limited. There's no excuse for this in this day and age. There are women doing exciting and interesting things across the board, and I think journalism needs to do a much better job of reaching out. That said, so do all of us need to do a better job of speaking out and making sure that our voices are being heard, or that we're putting ourselves in a position. I think this is a place where Sheryl Sandberg's lean in is a good admonition to all of us who are here. I'm old enough to remember when USA Today had their Fox in a Box. Barbara Cochran probably remembers this, when they sort of said we're going to have a girl, a picture of a girl or a woman on every page. Well, it's not as simple as that. It's much more about what are we reporting on, and what are we trying to show about what is described as news. And I think that's probably the most phenomenal and fundamental shift that we're seeing. And journalism has got to follow what people are self-selecting to learn and talk about, that we can learn from social media. We are learning that people will find their news somewhere else if they can't find it from the sources they want and on the topics they care about.
You just called on women to be available to journalists to speak. Are women in general too slow to agree to be a news source?
It's hard to believe anyone in America is no longer willing to be a news source. Maybe we could use some leaning back. So I don't think it's easy to characterize or generalize about women, but I would say we don't have a right to criticize if we're not leaning in.
Speaking of that, what do you think about the debate over Sheryl Sandberg's book and the advice she's given? Does she deserve the criticism she's gotten?
Well, I think she deserves credit for kicking off a really good conversation. I have to say, I have an employee who told me one day she was leaning in as she was going into her maternity leave, and I thought, okay, I've seen one effect of what Sheryl's trying to do. I hear people talk about it now, and people are trying to assess their own sense of progress in this regard. I think she's raised very important issues about our progress or lack of progress in some critical ways. I know she's been criticized because she's in a position to perhaps lean in any way she wants, but I think it's important that we recognize her job has been to raise the issue, and the fact that there are women who are single or in lower paying jobs who don't have the same opportunities. It's still important for all of us to have the conversation about whether a woman ought to have more opportunities, whether women ought to stand up more for what they want. And frankly, we need to make sure that the conversation is not just about women, but about men as well. And where any of us need to lean in for the things that matter in our lives. You know, there are times actually when I think you want to lean back, and that's okay too. I don't think she's saying one or the other is the only way to go. It's just we need to make sure, if we want to see more women in higher places, if we want to see more women recognized, we can't criticize without taking a look at the role each of us plays.
Questioner asks, 50 years after the publication of The Feminine Mystique, we're still talking about how women can balance work and family, as evidenced by the fact that everybody knew what we meant when we said lean in. You've had the balancing experience yourself. What's your advice?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think balance shifts at every stage of your career, and there are times when balance looks one way, and times when it looks another way, and you can't take a snapshot of how it's feeling to you right at the moment, because it's never going to feel right. You're either going to be balancing, you're leaning in or leaning out or leaning forward or back. I'm of the generation that did sort of think you could have it all, and I still think all is the critical word. It's a definitional word. So you can have whatever you choose to go after. Sometimes you're at a point in your life when you can have more, and sometimes you're at a point in your life when you can have less, because you're going to heavy up on one part of your career or one part of your family life or the other. It is still not easy enough to balance, and I think that's not necessarily the fault of the system or anything else. I mean, frankly, the BlackBerry has made it even harder to balance. As much as we might have thought originally that technology was going to make it easier to balance, it's only made it harder. And I also think, if I look back on my own career, I don't regret ever having balanced a family and a career. I'm glad I worked in a place where there were days I could put an emphasis on one or the other, and I think you need to know when that is, that you have to plan your life around that phase that you're in. My son one day said, "Mom," he asked what my job was, and I started explaining it. He said, "Don't bother, I know what you do. You break the glass ceiling." And I always felt my kids appreciated that I had something in my life that I really loved, and that's why I left the house every day. But I think it's also important to recognize there are times when you need to know you need to go home as well, and nobody should ever criticize or judge another person. And our employers really need to understand that people have needs at different times in their lives that just need a little bit of recognition and give.
Looking to your work, now that you are both the president and CEO of the foundation, what campaign might we see next?
Well, we're always looking for a new campaign, but the passion I have right now is to figure out how do we make young people the center of all of what we do. And I'm not sure that will necessarily be a campaign. We do a lot of great work with young people now through social media, through our Global Classrooms program, through Girl Up. But I have a feeling that we haven't quite connected and interlinked our vision of young people as the future leaders of the world, as the creators of what's going to be the next thing, and as the carriers of our values going forward. So for us, it's all about that. I just appointed a youth task force to think about it and help us explore ways we could work closer with the UN on its own work on youth, how we could ramp up our own programs, and just to figure out what we might do that would help us ensure that all of our programs are really building a better future for young people. So somewhere in there is going to come that next campaign.
Your previous positions were high-ranking and strategic, but in support of someone else at the top. Now that you are the president and the CEO, what's different?
That's a great question. Yeah, I've always been that great number two, and now I'm that great number one, I hope. And for me, I guess the most interesting thing has been I'm a great implementer and I'm a great driver. I love big ideas and I love new ideas and I love pushing them forward. And I've always worked for somebody who had the vision. And I'm now stretching my vision gene, and that's a very exciting opportunity. I have the great privilege of working in an institution that has plenty of vision and plenty of good ideas. So corralling it, integrating the best ideas, and then setting a course that is looking out 5 to 10 years and trying to understand where a philanthropic organization will be to really make a difference as a fully functioning part of a 3-sector strategy that includes government and business and the nonprofit sector, to me, is where the vision is going to come. And it's exciting to finally have that opportunity to explore it, draw on the best thinking of people around me, and to hook up with all the other institutions that are thinking about that kind of a vision.
Questioner says, many people would never have heard of Darfur had it not been for George Clooney as an advocate. What countries would you say are most neglected now and most in need of a George Clooney or an Angelina Jolie to draw attention?
By the way, I think when they do draw attention, people like Angelina Jolie and George Clooney, it's a real value and a real service. You know, sometimes we just need something to break through. So we're watching closely the Horn of Africa still, and the Sahel with the great hunger crisis. Mali is obviously a troubled area. And the Sudan is frankly still in trouble, and we need to keep our eye there. The gender-based violence in the DRC is horrifying, and as Ashley Judd called it, an intended consequence of war, and we need to keep speaking out against that. So we never know when that next place is going to be and where we need to next put our attention, but I've been really impressed by what's been going on in India, for example, in the way that that country's citizens are standing up and taking on this issue of what's going on with women and girls. And so watching a country like that stand up and say, we want to have different sets of values, we want to see our country change, is the other area where I think, frankly, we need to keep our eye not only on the problems, but on those kinds of really exciting transitions.
We are almost out of time, but before asking the last question, I have a couple of housekeeping matters to take care of. First of all, I'd like to remind you about our upcoming luncheon speakers. On March 26th, we'll have Robert Johnson, the chairman of RLJ Companies Incorporated. He will discuss Black opinions in the age of Obama. On April 9th, we have Dr. John Noseworthy, who's the president and CEO of the Mayo Clinic. He will discuss issues facing the healthcare industry. And on April 12th, we will welcome back Ken Burns, a documentary filmmaker, who will discuss his new documentary, The Central Park Five. Second, I would like to present our guest with the traditional National Press Club coffee mug. And one last question for you.
All right.
Many of the countries you talked about today, highlighting some of the problems they're facing, have already had female heads of state. The U.S., of course, hasn't. When do you think we will see a woman as president of the U.S.?
It's too tempting to say 2016, isn't it? Well, it's about time. I don't think there's any question about that. And we've certainly seen with women leaders around the world, it's not that they necessarily are going to make a difference, but every single one of them has. So I think it's high time, and if it's not my generation, it'll certainly be the one after me. So thank you.
Thank you very much for being our guest today. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff, including its Journalism Institute and Broadcast Center, for their help in organizing today's event. And finally, here's a reminder that you can find out more information about the National Press Club, including about becoming a member, on our website. Also, if you'd like to get a copy of today's program, please check out the website at www.press.org. Thank you. We are adjourned.